Hello, everyone. This is John Zorn, Executive Director of Arts Reach, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm really excited to have with us Roger Sametz, coming to us from upstate New York. And we've had webinars with Roger before that were extremely well received. And now he's got a new topic that he wants to share with everyone. So Roger, welcome. And if you have questions for Roger about anything related to brand, just type them into the question box and we'll handle your questions at the appropriate time. So whenever you feel like it's time to type a question in, just go for it. So Roger, welcome and take it away.
Great, thank you. Welcome everybody, and thank you for spending some of your midday with us. Hope to cover a sort of timely topic, pandemic-driven innovations and how they're more effective if they're brand-driven, and they can also strengthen your brand. So we're going to sort of dive in here. Agenda, pretty straightforward, a couple of slides on who's behind your screen. Then we're going to sort of look at how things changed in the last 18 months and how people innovated, and then talk about how we can build a brand to make those innovations stronger. And with a case study of a project that's actually in progress at New Jersey Symphony. So Sametz Blackstone, I'm in Hudson Valley, as John said. The office is in Boston, which when we're in office, we'll be in the office. And we're a little different than perhaps some firms you work with in that we integrate all those bullets you see on the bottom of the screen, from research through to content and visual design and web to actually training leaders in organizations and boards. We make a lot of stuff, but I think we mostly get hired because of this strategic bent that we have in defining and articulating clients' differentiated meaning and promise, and building resonance with different constituencies, focused on both earned and contributed income. And something we started, I don't know, decades ago, making sure that clients really own their communication programs as assets. So it's not just like a subscription brochure that gets thrown over the wall. We have a deep arts and culture base. I'm not going to read any of these, but from large symphony orchestras to small music festivals to mid-sized museums. So we cover a lot of stuff that hopefully connect with those of you who have tuned in. And we have a deep education practice, and that's kind of up on the screen because education has a lot of the same issues as arts organizations. Nobody has to go to the ballet. No one has to give money to the ballet, and no one has to go to a school, a particular school. It has to, be that magnet and have the right gravitational pull. And of course, no one has to give money. So we find the two of these very, compatible. We learn from each other. So let's look back 18 months. I know probably nobody wants to, or before 18 months, when we actually had audiences. We put on plays and reviews. We put on operas. We put on ballet, various sorts. We put on concerts. People went to museums of different flavors. And we had our, community programs that we could do live, all different sorts. And we could actually get up close and personal with our donors. Well, that was 18 months ago. So then, as we all know, pandemic happened. And we had empty theaters and empty museums and places where we might have given lessons or had outreach programs. It's also pretty much empty. Performers, were out of work until we found other things for them to do with them. And this is how we talk to our donors. The good news is that many of you pivoted, as much as we sort of hate to use that word. It should have like a TM or something after it, and innovated. And overnight, at the same time you were pivoting, your brand became ever more important. It became, what drove decisions in your favor or not. Whether people wanted money back for tickets or wanted to donate them. Whether donors in fact stepped up or not. And ideally, your brand also then was really important in informing innovations. And many of you became media companies overnight, whether or not you were prepared for it or had to make significant investments in order to produce digital content. And the successful efforts were the ones that were really, well branded and connected. So here's an example from Apollo Theater, totally, connected to their brand, not remotely a one-off. Most of you or many of you made programming that, people could, take in at home where they were at that point, certainly locked in, and came up with ways for people to sort of watch and listen and enjoy. Again, showing examples where, these innovations or this pivoting, were really well connected to the organization so that they could build the stature of the organization. This small theater company here, came up with this innovative notion of still here, which, had a lot of meaning and a little tongue-in-cheek to be the title for their COVID programming. A client of ours, small art association museum in Provincetown, got a grant to make a virtual tour so that people could still wander around the museum and not just have, stills of images. And some clients, another one of ours, Dallas Symphony, really went all out to become a resource. So you can, their new site that we built, you can watch things, you can listen to things, you can tune into things. So rather than just having, offerings, they took the opportunity to make themselves a much wider resource than people just coming to hear a concert. And many of you started online education, or you beefed up your education efforts. Again, keep people engaged and remember people why they value you. This is a BSO education shot where you can see the different sections of the orchestra sort of color-coded as part of that particular program. And people brought their offerings to their communities on the streets. So this is a Dallas truck with obviously a very tiny ensemble on the truck. Ballet Hispanico came up with a sort of sub-brand, closely branded again, to connect people to the community. And the Boston Symphony, after their tour to China was canceled, all the musicians volunteered to do a free concert for the city. And what was, I think, most interesting, and something that people had talked about for a decade but actually hadn't happened, is that fourth wall got broken down. People started showing members of their staff or their teams in their basement with their toddler walking by and the dog pulling something, and it made personal connections that in some cases had just never happened. So these were all innovations that really got people closer to organizations, and people did find ways. Here's Seattle Shakespeare to actually have online dailies. And then what was sort of really more interesting in terms of programming, coming up with ways to create programming that are digital only. So this is just one of my favorites in this Getty program, to have sort of competition to make masterworks out of stuff that you had in the home, and it's pretty creative. So it reinforced what they stood for. It was certainly engaging, kept people coming back. So what happened in a year and a half is a lot of these innovations really delivered results and delivered a lot of change that would not have happened that quickly. So people beefed up technology, they hosted virtual audiences, and suddenly they had global audiences. They developed new education and discovery programs. They broke down that fourth wall we were just talking about, and some even raised more money. So I've shown you some good examples, but speed doesn't always equal strategy. So what's important to think about is, with the innovations that you've done or are thinking about doing, are they aligned with your brand? Do they advance your brand? And is the way that they're branded, do you get credit, or are they just sort of one-off tactical innovations? So that's what we're going to look at, how we can make sure that you do get credit and they do build your brand and that they're informed by your brand. So, brand, as you all know, is more than a logo, as much as I like the back of the 57 Biscayne. In art space, it's really what you promise, combined with your history, your position in the landscape, and your values. But that's expressed through your offerings, whether they're live, digital, whatever. the experiences you deliver, certainly how you communicate, and the impact that you have and can talk about. But this all needs to be informed by strategy. So for that, we're going to look at, what are the attributes you need to be known for? What's your brand architecture, which may not be something many of you have thought about, kind of a jargony kind of thing. Your messaging and your system of visual expression. So the goal here, just sort of the thesis of this whole thing, is to create a virtuous circle. What do we mean by that? Well, if you have a successful offering or innovation, you want that branded in such a way that your organization gets credit, because then it then gets stronger. So it can have sort of brand equity to launch innovations, or to sort of give that brand equity to innovations, which then can make the organization stronger. So you get the idea. You want to keep this sort of circle going so that everything you're doing is not only strengthening the innovations, but strengthening your organization. So how do we do that? So sort of a process here. When we work with people, it's about first getting calibrated through interviews and quantitative surveys and audits of what you do and audits of your competitive landscape. Evolving a brand strategy, and we're going to look at attributes, and we're going to look at brand relationships in the next couple of minutes, so that you then have the sort of foundation to start building, a messaging framework. What's your content? What are you saying? Which then, again, it's kind of an organic process here, gives you the wherewithal to build a visual brand, whether it's you need an identifier or logo, or that may be just fine, but you need to think about your approach to type and color and imagery. And then you have the stuff, you have the tool chest to make communications across whatever media, all of which will reinforce each other and your innovations. And then lastly, what we said sort of at one of the upfront slides, making sure that, all this is an asset. So we're going to look at some of this. I can't get into all of it, but throughout, we want to think about raising marketing and fundraising together. Good marketing is good fundraising and vice versa. So jumping in, getting calibrated, we think about interviews, and you could do this on your own or with a consultant. We like to start in the center, like with the people who have a vision, and then sort of move out, sort of we're both listening and testing the vision as we go out to these concentric circles. You can do this in focus groups. You can do this, lately we're doing it over Zoom, different meetings, surveys. Of course, when you're doing it this way, get very odd looking people sometimes, like me there in the sun. And you want to learn about what your different audiences care about. So this was a focus group, obviously, with Post-its. People who care about the educational aspects of your organization. What are they looking for? Who's the target? What do single ticket buyers care about? Because if you don't start with the sort of end users, then it's sort of all about what you're pushing out. You want to sort of work backwards. For many organizations, civic pride is an important driver. What do donors care about? What do you want them to do? What actions do you want them to take? So you learn about all this in the sort of calibration stage, and you want to look at, what you're doing and what other people in your space are doing. So this is just a couple slides from Project Seattle Symphony before we got into it. Whether you like that Wolfgang piece in the center or not, be handsome. The whole thing is still a kind of Where's Waldo? Nothing reinforces anything. And whether these are innovative or not, there's so many sub-brands going on that it's like, okay, where's Seattle Symphony? So we're going to now look at sort of attributes. We're kind of moving a little bit quickly here from a big project we did for Lyric Opera in Chicago. So we think of these in 3 columns. This is also something you can do, and we have a worksheet sort of at the end to help you do it. We think about this in 3 columns. Those that you own that are positive that you want to reinforce, those that you could credibly get to, aspirational ones, they need a little work, and what's the baggage? So for Lyric, they owned artistic excellence, they owned cultural leader, they owned innovative, but the aspirational ones is a longer list, and that often drives our work. They needed to be more relevant to the diverse citizens of Chicago, sort of third bullet from the bottom. They need to be more welcoming. They need to be more accessible. And then baggage, which for opera is sort of one notch worse than for orchestras, you know, too white, too pale, too stuffy, boring, whatever. So you can never like say we're not these things. You just have to prove the other two columns. And it's not an academic list because you actually nail this for your organization and everybody agrees to it. It informs how you write and design and, you know, even programming and behavior. So we're going to move, again, we're kind of walking around that chart that you saw into brand strategy so that you can craft relationships so that you get credit and people understand what you're doing. So this is a really short course in brand relationships. So product branding is what you're seeing on the top left there. You know, what you'd see if you were at an airport newsstand. Remember airport newsstands? So these are all made by Mars, but they intentionally, Mars is hidden. So this is product branding because every product stands on its own. Now, some arts organizations actually do this. They ought not to because, as you can tell, you know, the parent brand gets no credit. Moving to the right, something called endorsed branding. It's basically product branding, but Nabisco has their little triangle on things that tells people somehow this stuff is, you know, worth more than the Stop and Shop chocolate chip cookies. So a lot of organizations do this. It's certainly better than the one on the left. Moving to the bottom left here, something I think we coined the term source branding some years ago. But we can see here, I mean, there are different products, but there's a system here. And, you know, if they're out of one kind of pepperidge farm cookie, you'll buy another one. So you'll cross-sell yourself. And you can see the pepperidge farm cookies from, you know, 50 feet away because of the visual system. So this is a good strategy for arts organizations. And then finally, master branding. We're staying with flour and butter and sugar here. Master branding, just category names. So Enzymes just says cake, strudel, whatever. So that loses a little bit of the interest of naming things, you know, with proprietary names. But somewhere, you know, in these sort of three, you know, and you don't have to be one strategy, you know, but it's something to think about so that things just don't float away. So when we began work with Lyric, this is what their sort of brand strategy looked like. So they had big proscenium shots for marketing stuff mixed in with things that they were actually renting the hall for. So that confused people. This Chicago Voices was a great program, but the equity just floated away because of the way it was branded. They had this brand they invented called Unlimited, where they put all their innovative stuff. So that meant that the main brand wasn't known for any innovations. So operas in English, operas by, you know, some Black composer in Chicago were all shunted over to Unlimited. And while they did musicals to make some money, Broadway at Lyric was always confused with, you know, the sort of national Broadway brand in different cities. So we brought all of that in. And then they had these other weird brands named Roger to one side. So we brought it all in to be master branded so the organization got credit for all of this. So moving on to messaging, kind of working our way around the chart. We think in terms of storylines and a framework, and then also the notion that one size doesn't fit all. So if you look at this chart, and the y-axis is, you know, that what you stand for, and the x-axis is what constituents care about, we want to start that conversation where you're likely to win, that top corner. So you've learned all this, you know, through your interviews, looking at the competitive landscape. So you take a pretty good shot at this. And what we do first is develop storylines. So storylines aren't stories. They're sort of the concepts that you want to have in people's heads. And, you know, there can't be 40 of them. You know, certainly have to be under 10, probably. So you can sort of scan some of these. You know, the first one's sort of about what you get out of a, you know, being at the experience, innovation, artistic excellence, you know, really sort of defining opera in this case as the only art form where all these different disciplines come together and they have an amazing space. And then, of course, some of these are aspirational, the welcoming and accessible, the fact that they use opera to ignite creativity across the city. And again, you know, that civic pride thing, second from the bottom, you know, really the cornerstone of the cultural landscape, source of civic pride. And important for fundraising, you know, talking about fundraising, talking about donors as partners and collaborators and not just people who, pony up money. So if you sort of go through the attributes and go through the storyline exercise, you can start to put together a messaging framework. And we call it this because it's got a bunch of parts in it. So everybody wants their high-level elevator speech for sure. So that's sort of a yellowy, orangey, thick bar there. But one size doesn't fit all. A plain giving prospect is not the same as a single ticket prospect, for instance, or the parent of some kid who might be interested in an education program. So we work through to do both a high-level message and what we call these tilted audiences. So again, you could do this in workshops, staying with Lyric for a minute here. In different groups, you do board groups and staff groups, and performer groups, your team groups, whatever, to come up with a high-level message. So in bits here, amazes, replenishes, inspires, and engages. You saw that in a storyline. How, must see, must hear live experiences. What goes into that? The whole notion of these different disciplines that come together that bring characters to life in triumph and tragedy. Pulling the orchestra, chorus, theater, dance, and stagecraft together. And then what's the benefit? The immersing audiences in worlds both familiar and unexpected, and then leaving everyone thinking and feeling differently when the curtain comes down. So this is a message that sits above, marketing text for any, particular offering. And then we've talked about these sort of tilts. So again, you could do this in groups. What are the sort of ways in for donors? So the reason we talk about that is, you're not monolithic, your donors aren't monolithic. What are the different things they could want to support? So some, care about sustainable future of opera. Some care about the grand opera canon. Others care about advancing new composers. Some care about being a resource. Some care about the physical space. Some care about training, diversity. And the answer is okay. So coming up with ways that connect donor passions to organizational priorities, but having that be a menu means that you can get sort of more people connected. So then you've got sort of what it takes to, marshal things for a planned giving prospect one way and a prospective, single ticket buyer another. And this can then, of course, be promulgated across your organization. So you can just sort of see how some of this comes together in the first Lyric stuff. So even in a subscription piece, there are messages here. You're just seeing the storylines, but we always, sort of steal real estate to, again, connect development with fundraising. So we reorganize our development communications, again, to be less about, you get a better parking space for a free glass of champagne, to making people part of the family. It's sort of the entry level. At patrons, it's more about investment and being partners. And at the next highest level, at benefactors, it's about collaborator and investing and bringing opera to life and redefining what it means to be a great opera company. So less of that sort of tit for tat kind of thing. And we got rid of membership because most arts organizations can't really support membership. Right through the messages on there on your website. So then sort of the last bucket here, visual expression. And the reason we call it sort of systems is we wanted to provide both the sort of glue to hold things together, but any arts organization has to build equity across years and look fresh on people's kitchen tables or first website look or whatever. So some organizations, go we really want to look fresh, and then they don't build equity. Other organizations, stay with the equity and they don't look fresh. So coming up with how to sort of find that balance is really, a challenge here that all of us organizations face. So we think about it as systems because yes, you have your logo. We're calling it a primary identifier because it could be a word mark, could be a symbol, could be whatever. But people also see how all these other disciplines come together. So your choice of type and how you use type, your choice of color and how you use color, all these things also define you. So let's start with identifiers. This was a before mark for what was a kind of run-of-the-mill Western art museum that we helped transform into a really world-class craft museum. And it's all about, not having velvet ropes and being able to touch the craft. Presenting organization, we actually did this, Mark, about 15 years ago, but with new management and a new emphasis on sort of world music and the need to be a little more dynamic, energetic, subsequent Mark. So you want a Mark to be able to tell a story. This is one of their fundraising pieces. Sydney, which used to look like this before we started working with them, perfectly acceptable, baton swoosh. The Mark we did, which sadly was recently discontinued, you can see the stories you can tell. Is this the orchestra? Is this the repertoire? Is this the audience? Is this the excitement? Is this diversity? So to the extent that you can have a Mark that tells a story, good shape. And sometimes there are name changes that go with Marks. We started with the Sun Valley Summer Symphony, which is in Idaho. Their history had this elkin horn and mountains. We subsequently changed the name, but we wanted to keep the iconography they had, but make it a little more modern so they could tell their story. But then looking at the rest of the system, we're going to dip into somewhere Seattle here. They had their Mark. It's not like you have to go in and change your Mark if it works. But we talked about color. So, this hot cerise color in the top left, it was perfect for this Seattle and what that city stood for. It would be anathema in Boston, completely inappropriate. So you have a primary palette and an extended palette, but also, again, it's how you use things. So these sort of serving suggestions that move from sort of more energetic top left to calmer bottom right, along with, choice of type and how type is used, and importantly, thinking about photography in different buckets. So here you see, who makes the experience, who participates in the experience, who the audience is, where experiences happen. If you think about that and then think about the different ways that cameras can, focus, long, short, wide, whatever, you can start to build stories. In the case of Seattle, they also wanted it to be different. They wanted some other evocative level of imagery. So we came up with that. And you can see, how this is starting to come together. In the first subscription piece we did, the second one where we photographed smoke, sort of hold things together. This third one where we introduced a new music track. The tagline, "Listen boldly," stays there. And in all of them, there's innovation in how the elements, same typefaces, same colors, are used, right through to school programs and invitations to development events that might look quite different than what you're used to looking at, through to a new website. So you see how all this sort of hangs together. And then what's sort of interesting in terms of their innovations, this is one of those obviously socially distanced groups they were filming. That whole notion of evocative imagery, now holds all their recordings together. So they're instantly recognizable as where they come from. And then it all gets documented. So just to go to finish this section in a much smaller group, Sun Valley Festival in Idaho, we sort of documented their system, much like you just saw. So it's got these, curves and stuff that are coming from nature. It's got textures that come from nature. It's all about music in nature. It can be pretty abstract, like you see on the left, which really separates them from small town bands in the state. But it has some room to move so that, galas and things can have their own look. And certainly a lot of their innovations were about doing things outdoors, but they certainly got credit for them all. So we're going to sort of wind up here with a case study in progress. Often we do things where it's all cooked, but I thought it'd be interesting to show you how something is actually coming together. So New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, which we're renaming as New Jersey Symphony. But they're in a sort of tough spot between Philadelphia Orchestra and New York Phil. And our job was to build engagement, differentiation for one of the really country's most innovative orchestras. But they weren't necessarily getting credit for that. Innovative before pandemic and even more innovative during. So the goals here, like for many of you, raising awareness, engagement, stature, and of course, both flavors of income, being differentiated and recognizable, getting credit for innovations. They also had a centennial coming up, so this is going to ramp up to that. Their challenges, unfocused, low brand awareness, low community ownership. This had to do with the fact that they're in 7 venues and they don't own any of them. So that's a tough road. And that many of these venues actually, presented competing orchestral music. So it's confusing people out there. And some of them were better known. I mean, if their venue presents, the Berlin Philharmonic, that's a way better known brand than New Jersey Symphony. But they had a lot of these signature innovations. Starting in the pandemic, they made these concert films, not just putting a camera in the back of the center aisle and pressing start. Really well produced. They had this new role of resident artistic catalyst to really engage the community and advance DEI goals, which is something they've been actually championing for a long time. They were one of the first to commission a work expressly for socially distanced and to deliver digitally. And they had very targeted programming like Lunar New Year celebration. And their programming was ahead of the DEI curve. They had one of the first Black music directors like decades and decades and decades ago. But did anyone know any of this? Not so much. So we started again looking sort of inward and outward, through interviews and audits. This is a page from their then website. Again, no local ownership because they were in so many places, and it was hard for people to say, this is my orchestra. A lot of disparate brand offerings. So you'll see, like in the top row here, is an approach to virtual, is an approach to at home. Is that confusing? Broadcast. Everything had its own imagery. So it was, a little bit like that saying "Where's Waldo" thing. Like, okay, who are they? What do they stand for? I can't possibly take all this in. And then visually, they were pretty disparate. There were lots of different kinds of imagery. There's a campaign piece on the left, something for education in the center, a Messiah, and a annual appeal. And so none of these bills recognition and equity in the parent, and then a lot of imagery. So we started in on the name and the mark, and looked at sort of messaging, which was kind of businessy but not benefit oriented. And this all came together in a brief. So this is important to bring people along. We want to keep engaging people in the process. So then, okay, we learned a lot. We did a lot of audits and chats, and let's put this to work. So we did, our attribute 3 columns. You all know this by now. And we worked on, okay, we agreed that we were going to drop orchestra on the idea that symphony and orchestra were kind of redundant, and one of their issues were they had a really long name, and they already had their URL was NJ Symphony, and their social media handles were NJ Symphony. So we looked at, okay, how could a word mark express that differently from more conservative to less conservative? And then we asked questions about brand architecture. So I sort of hinted before, like, is virtual the same as at home? Is it the same as couch? Whatever. They had a program called Everywhere, but they were just short musician videos. They weren't about everywhere, whereas their community programs were called Partners, but that doesn't sound like a community concert. So, the naming and the brand architecture needed work. So you see on the left, in these just 2 samples here, a bunch of stuff that all ended, well, again, it's in process. None of this is launched, so keep it under your hat. A bunch of stuff that's all going to be called virtual. Underneath that, a bunch of stuff that's all going to be called Everywhere. So there can still be names on communications and stuff, but not sub-brands. So they can be known for fewer things, but better known for those innovations. Develop storylines. Sometimes we do sort of Uber ones because they were across the state. New Jersey's orchestra, and then, expansive reach through performance, education, community collaboration. But then the supporting storylines get a little more specific and perhaps a little more interesting. Their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is way up there. Innovation is way up there. So we could put together an elevator message. They redefine what it means to be nationally leading, that they're essential to the rich cultural fabric. They provide inspiring, enriching, entertaining experience across genres and venues, and coming up with a benefit for being in all these different places, bringing music that's meaningful to you. There's a whole lot more underneath that, but I don't want to have too many more word slides. And then these are then tilted for different attendees. So a first-time attendee cares about the entertainment part. They care about it might be a good date night. They care about it being thrilling, or getting into some cool venues, and that it's whereas prospective donor really cares about the nationally leading and relevant, and cares about the fact that they're making these efforts to, come up with the next generation of audiences and through their education efforts, and that they're essential to the rich cultural fabric. So then, we had a name and we had a sort of direction for a mark. So what we wanted to do is sort of, put it together so that their innovations could be attached to it and not have to have sub-brands. There's a core palette of blue with an accent palette. And an interesting way of dealing with imagery, both full color, black and white with a lot of contrast, and then color overlays. A system of typography that's all about weights and shifts that is in itself dynamic and giving a message. And then this set of sort of dynamic angles. So you can see how this starts to come together in these prototypes. You can also see how those main brand buckets are in here. So you see how virtual is attached there. Or concert films is attached. The things we just looked at in that brand chart and what everywhere actually means. And then this was actually it's the current site. And because no one wants to spend a lot of money, we wanted to show how using the color and type of the new mark without a lot of work, it could be brought into brand and be a whole lot cooler in all senses of the word. And now you see that, how some things are really starting to come together. So subscription brochure, some of their innovative stuff inside, when you have to present a lot of different people. This is an issue that arts organizations have. When the images are all from management agents, how do you make it look like you own it? Right through to, social media and even making emails interesting. So that's our tour. The key takeaways here and some worksheets. As we said at the beginning, especially in this last 18 months, your brand really has a bigger influence on how people make decisions in your favor or not. Ideally, you'd like your brand new innovations, and going back to that virtuous circle idea, having these innovations that strengthen your brand, not putting your interesting stuff, in a sub-brand called Unlimited. And then, quick review, that your brand is about what you mean, how it's expressed, through offerings, experience, communications, and impact. And the things we sort of highlight here, which are only some of the things on that chart, really working on that attribute table, thinking about brand architecture and those different strategies, but what'll give the right level of differentiation, but also connect things, messaging and storylines to come up with a framework, and then, of course, how that comes together visually in communications. So, success, and, we've been working through this the same way you guys have been, organizations that actually live their brand and provide, valuable content in ways that, people can take in, you're constantly improving your value. If you've got staff that's, dispersed, making sure that teams have the tools and thinking to deliver communications that, come together. You don't want dispersed to equal disparate. And making sure that you're deploying, this verbal and visual approaches that you've worked out or that you already have, to elevate all content and to help you get credit. You're evolving, for sure, we all are. innovation aligned with your brand, will really help you continue your upward trajectory. So in terms of worksheets, and this is being recorded, or you can just send us a note. We can send you these. The column of how you think about attributes, how you think about what different constituencies care about. So constituency 1, if that's your subscribers, and constituency 2 is people who might come but don't, or whatever, or partners. What do they care about, and how does that intersect with your priorities? The sort of unarticulated messaging framework to show you the different levels you might think about. And then lastly, the components of visual thinking. It's more than your mark. It's more than a quote corporate close quote color. It's how you make choices and deploy all of this. So that's our tour. So we can stop sharing our screen, and if I can figure out how to do that, and we can have some questions. I know how to do that. Okay.
Okay. Great, Roger. I think you get the prize for covering the most ground in 40 minutes of anybody I've ever known. So,
that's why it's recorded.
We'll put the prize in the mail to you.
Okay. Happy.
All right. And now it is time for questions from the viewing audience. You can ask Roger anything that's, on your mind about your brand, or what you're considering for your brand, or what you're considering for your innovations, etc. Okay, here we go. I know we need different messages for different constituents. I agree that planned giving prospects aren't the same as new attendees, but my boss wants us all on the same page with one message. How do I move her?
Well, I guess one way to, yes, people put a lot of emphasis on elevator speeches, elevator messages. I guess one way would be, if you're able to do this, just posit, okay, if you're talking to, a prospective first-time attendee, whether it's museum or whatever, or trail walk, what would you be saying? And then, okay, if you're talking to, a mid-level donor that you're trying to get to be a higher level donor, how would you talk to that person? If you're talking to someone in the government in your town or city, how are you going to talk to them? So, if the conversation is frank, she's going to be saying different things to these different people, because she's going to know that they're sort of interested in different things. So she can kind of prove her own, sort of be proof of the point, which is that, see, you just talked to different people, you've met them where they are. Don't you think we should sort of think about that organizationally? Or, whether or not you're doing it with your boss or someone else. But the reality is that people in conversation do it. So using that, it's like, okay, you would naturally do that. So let's, put that into practice institutionally.
All right, great. Well, keep those cards and letters coming in, and we'll take care of your questions as we go along here. What are 3 suggestions I can make to my team about branding the innovative initiatives we're doing? The team is a bit territorial in both naming and what things look like. But if I can start them in the right direction, I think they'll be open to the bigger idea of branding. Interested in your ideas from your experience.
Well, and it certainly has that. People come up with good ideas and they say, oh, and it should look like this. And if you have an in-house design talent or something, they sometimes get bullied into doing whatever that is. Or I've got this really cool name. So the first step is to get people to sort of step a little bit outside of the circle they're in. Think about, okay, how is this going to advance the organization? And is the naming you're talking about, or is the visual expression you're talking about, are we going to get credit? Are people going to connect it to us, or is it going to sort of float off there? We worked with a big orchestra years ago that had this very cool education program in all the middle schools, big city. and it was called Adventures in Music. And the orchestra name just wasn't even there. And they wondered why they couldn't raise money or why they didn't get credit. So you get people sort of think about, okay, you know, we're all here to advance your organization and the organization's mission. You know, is what you're proposing going to do that? And that's where you get into those, you know, strategies of, you know, that Nabisco slide versus the Pepperidge Farm slide. You know, the Nabisco slide, you know, has more independence. The Pepperidge Farm slide, you know, where there's more of a system, you know, you sacrifice a little bit of the proprietariness, you know, but either, you know, is certainly better than just, you know, going alone, where, you know, that money spent is not going to, you know, go farther than every dollar. I mean, it's kind of like every buck spent on that program is going to generate 80 cents worth of, you know, interest in something as opposed to a buck being spent to generate like $1.20 worth. So there's a business case as well as a branding case.
Okay. What tips might you share about helping people, including founders or leadership, navigate the balance between equity or the fear of the loss of equity and freshness or aspirations?
Can you read that one again?
Yeah, sure. What tips might you share about helping people? I believe that's, you know, top level staff people, including founders and leadership, navigate the balance between equity and freshness.
Right. Well, like I said, most, if not all, anybody with a season has this issue. Because you want to look exciting seasonally, but you don't want to look so exciting that, you know, it looks like a different organization is in town. So, you know, again, I think the business case is having connection means every buck goes further, but it also means building, which is why we call things visual systems, and not just like, you know, not mobile oil, like here you have a color and a typeface. You know, if you have visual systems, you have the room to continue to, you know, explore like those 3 different subscription pieces we showed for Seattle Symphony. You have the room to explore, but still have enough glue across things, you know, to connect them. And, you know, we spent years working on this because it is a problem that everybody faces. But, you know, if you think systemically and not in terms of, you know, this communication and that communication, and that you have tools that have legs, you know, you can get to that balance. I mean, the system we put in place at Boston Symphony Orchestra, it continues to evolve, but it's there. It's 23 years later. You know, it does work. I can show you, you know, well, I can't show you right now, but I can show you stuff, you know, 10 years apart that looks both fresh and continuous.
All right. Excellent. Well, the person who asked that question says, thank you. Your examples were fabulous. So
Okay.
we're right on the money here. Okay, next question. We're a presenting organization, so we put on lots of different acts and they all come with their own imagery and photos. So we look very, to use your word, disparate, and sometimes not worth very much. How would I attack that problem?
So that's all about creating sort of a brand framework, not literally a framework, but like we went kind of quickly, but, you know, Lyric Opera of Chicago, we literally have a frame with a lyric mark in it. For the Celebrity Series in Boston, which exactly has that problem, it's a big presenting organization, you know, you get all these images from, you know, the artist management company, and they're all totally different. So you need to have enough of your own visual system so that when you put those pictures in there, you know, it's still your brand. So how you use type and color, you know, whether it is literally a framing device or, you know, just sort of framing device thinking, so that it doesn't look like, you know, your high school yearbook or something, or scrapbook. So that's why the visual system gets to be so important, especially for presenting organizations. And then on the verbal side, everybody's really good at, talking about what that act is, but they often don't have any sort of institutional narrative that sits above it. So really what you want is, you want to be marketing from the bottom up of the act, and you want to be marketing from the top down with your institutional message, and you want these sort of come together. A lot of presenting organizations don't have any institutional message. They're selling everything from the bottom up, which makes it really hard to take risks because you haven't built trust. If you get that institutional narrative attached to everything, then people will come to things that maybe they don't know. So it actually puts you in a better position, as well as using your, the curation of what you're bringing to people to build your brand.
Very good. For tiny organizations such as one with 2 1/3 time employees with limited time,
Yeah.
would it be more important to pursue 1 or 2 of your steps in depth, or to try to pursue all 4 in a less detailed way?
Well, it is kind of all system thinking, but you don't have to do it all in 10 minutes either. So, you could spread it out. I mean, there's no way to really skip, learning about your audience and thinking about attributes, because attributes really inform both the writing and the visual expression. So, I mean, those are exercises, you can do. It doesn't take a lot of people. I mean, obviously it takes time from your day job. And then whether you have, in-house design talent or working with somebody else, those attributes then inform how you think about that visual thinking. So I guess it's, I would say it's hard to skip those steps. I mean, we've sort of honed them over decades, but you don't have to rush doing it either. And one of the things that's been interesting, at least in our practice, is the number of organizations that have started on rebranding projects in the middle of the pandemic, which is sort of brave of them, but also really sensible, because then when you sort of come out the other side and you've done innovations along the way, being new and fresh is then something that makes more sense, and people aren't going to say, what'd you do that for? I mean, it's sort of an evolution that, we've learned, and here we are, now out the other side. But, we work with organizations that have 2 1/3 people, and of course we're there to help, but, you just take your time.
I think, Roger, that was 2 1/3 time employees.
Oh, okay. Well, that take more time.
2/3 of an employee, if you want to add them together.
Well, start with the attributes, because they at least help you make decisions as you can make them.
All right. Okay. We're getting close to the end of our hour, so don't be shy. Type in your question, send it on in, and let's get it answered for you. Okay, here we go. We've developed a sub-logo to our brand, to brand our season of entirely digital, but we'll return to primarily in-person programming next season. How do I decide which logo to use and where?
Okay, well, it's unfortunate that you have probably a digital logo. Depends how closely that's, that already attaches to your parent. Maybe one of them is, is more in line with the attributes you want to be associated with than the other. I mean, you need some objective criteria to make that decision beyond, I like it, I don't like it, or some CEO likes it or doesn't like it. So, go back to, think about attributes, think about, even if you're not doing it formally, think about, storylines, what do you want to be known for? And which of those is a better platform to tell those stories? But then, get behind it. I'd be interested in seeing them. Send them along.
All right. Well, there you go. Well, let me take this opportunity then, Roger, to mention that you are thankfully one of our arts allies. So members of our New Ways Forward program have access to experts like Roger at no cost, and they're happy to help you with whatever thing you're working on or wondering about at this moment in time, all you have to do is go to artsreach.com and sign up to meet with one of our Arts Allies, again at no cost, and we'll make that happen for you. It's part of your benefits. Speaking of benefits, okay. Last question then. Here we go. We've certainly come up with some innovations over the past 18 months, but I and my colleagues have been way more focused on making them happen and getting them out in the world than we have been thinking about brand. How do I infuse the process with brand thinking retroactively?
Well, it's obviously harder to do it retroactively than on the other end. I think you got to go look at the names. I mean, maybe there's a tagline or descriptor that can hold things together more. Maybe you can look at the brand architecture and simplify things the way I showed you in that New Jersey Symphony chart. Maybe there can be, you can put some together in a series or a package that has an umbrella name over them that might, better connect. Or, you're just evolve it. I mean, it's a new thing and it evolves, and, possibly the name changes, but obviously things like descriptors or bringing the, visual system into line are a little easier to do than changing a name if it's out there. But a lot of it is just, thinking about it differently, not thinking about it as this, that, and this, but, these are all aspects of who we are and what we would be known for, and they're all advancing our mission, presumably. So let's make sure that, they get connected. But you might take a little more time to do it if things are out there in the world.
Perfect. Roger, you're amazing as always, and we want to give you a big round of virtual applause. Stay tuned, everybody, for next week's installment of New Ways Forward. We'll have Keith Tomasek with us talking about the future of hybrid, etc. So until next time. Oh, and I almost forgot. We made a recording of the session. We will send that out, hopefully with the slides tomorrow. And so you'll have that to share with your team as well. Okay, Roger, until next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks, everybody. Bye.